So if you do have a little bubble that you still need to address, just take your little, take your knife, just the very point of it, and pop that bubble just like, just make a tiny, tiny, tiny little pinpoint hole, and make sure it goes all the way through, and then you can squeegee, and you're going to get some water right out of that little pinpoint hole. But once you do that, once that lays flat and the air and the water all comes out, then that hole is going to self-heal, and you won't even know it's there. You don't want to cut, you just want to actually make that tiny, tiny pinpoint hole. And you can see there's water coming out of there right now. I don't know if you can see that. But the water and the air is going to come right out. You can just squeegee over that a couple of times. Use whatever edge of your squeegee works best for you. And actually this is where two squeegees come in handy. And there you go. And then if you go over that a couple of times, that's going to self-heal. And you're not going to have a bubble at all. Alright, there's one other little trick that I want to show you, and that happens if you end up with an inside cut corner. So here you see I had one piece that I was able to pull along enough to cover my two surfaces that had to be covered. But I still need to fold it down over the sides. But you see, when I do that, any way I cut it, I'm going to end up with a little bit of a gap. So before you go over it with your hair dryer, remember that? Before you go over it with your hair dryer and stick it down to the front of your countertop, what I want you to do is cut an extra little piece. And remember, there's no pattern, so you're not going to end up with a pattern match problem. But cut a little piece that's enough of a length to fit right in that corner. Once you have it stuck down, then you can go ahead and fold this piece across on both sides. And you've got a perfect, and I'm just going to trim this up just a tad back to the corner, so it gets right back in that corner. And I don't know if you can see it, but right now I can kind of see that seam. Once I trim this off, it's going to be a nice seam right across. But you want to make sure that you use your hair dryer and get that top corner seam really tight, and then go ahead and trim around. There are a few ways that you can finish off that front edge. One thing that you can do once you have your piece cut and it's overhanging on the front edge, you can just go ahead and trim it up right along where the bottom edge is. And I've done that before and it works out great. But in my house I have little kids and they tend to come along and pick at things. So I'm going to tell you that I have also started doing on some of my installations a process where I cut this last little piece just so it wraps all the way under my laminate, because remember, it's not going to stick to the bottom of laminate. It's the granite film is not going to stick to the rough edge of your laminate. But what I do is I trim this piece off. So I go ahead and trim so I have still a little bit of overhang, but just about an inch. And actually, there we go. Use the hair dryer to get a nice tight seam on the top. I use my scraper right across the front, make sure I don't have any bubbles that I don't want. You can either use very small brads, and I have tiny, tiny little nails here, or a staple gun and your hammer, and wrap up wrap this little piece right under, and then hit it with some brads. So now I have a nice edge. It's bubble free on the top, I made sure of that. I have a nice edge, and it's going to be wrapped all the way underneath. If you need to, go back and trim underneath, and then you'll be able to close your cabinet doors, and it'll look like great real granite.